Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to start this piece with that word that we were encouraged not to use so that I don't do what was shared yesterday in this behavior. I'm going to start with a moment. Great is Ma'at, Shehuti Sashait, theirs are everlasting. They remain consistent and unchanged since Set to be the first time, from the new to creation, when Asar, us, Heru, Heteru, Nebuchadnezzar Einpu established the way of truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine harmony, and righteousness. And Tamari, Puanet, Kunsut, Inmaz, giving thanks. I needed to do that because when we talk about diasporan indigenous Africans reclaiming, returning, and resurrecting, it's going to start with this particular format that I was very honored to learn from Dr. Theology in my younger years, in regard to being able to start with an enunciation and then going into a space of preparation and then going into the area of opening and then talking about the implementation and then going to the closing. And believe it or not, we're going to do this in 15 minutes. I am not sure if we recognize this woman, but we should recognize this woman. Her name is Suzanne Césaire. And in 1945, she uttered and then composed these words, although some of her publications were not permitted to be distributed. Why in the past have we been so unconcerned about expressing our ancestral anxiety in a direct manner? The urgency of this cultural problem escapes only those who are determined to put their hands over their eyes so as not to be disturbed from the artificial peace, and at any cost, even the price of stupidity and death. We have too soon forgotten the slave ships and the sufferings of our slave forebears. Here, forgetfulness is tantamount to cowardice. 1945. The second phase of this enunciation is just speaking about the zenith of Pan-Africanism and a lot of the details of things that have been shared thus far at this particular colloquium. We've been discussing being in the second year of the International Decade of People of African Descent. We've been discussing organizations like the Caribbean Pan-African Network. We can speak of the Pan-African Diaspora Union, the Universal Negro and Female Association, African Communities League, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. We can speak of the various Pan-African organizations and civil society networks that exist abundantly. We can speak of the Global African Congress, the Republic of New Africa, and COVID. Do you understand where we're going? We have a number of organizational entities. We need, at this point, to make sure that we are developing tactics and strategies that allow us to address not only the scientific component, not only the technological component, not only, I think we know where I'm going, the engineering component, but the arts. So that when we come back to mathematics, notice the word I use, not just mathematics, but mathematics, because that is very ancestral. So you'll see in this particular presentation that I posit that the holistic discussions in order for us to have these honorable remembrances, these commemorations, these various gatherings, whether it's a seminar, a colloquium, a conference, a congress, a summit, or whatever, that they come forth with something tangible that we can then implement when we move forward. You may notice that the manner in which I spell Africa is A-F-R-A-K-A. Something for us to reflect on. In the ancient metametric, miscalled hieroglyphs, the syllable af means flesh. This part. When we refer to Ra, we're speaking of not only the sun, but the hidden sun, that illuminating energy that we bring forth, that fire. And when we say Ka, we're speaking of the soul essence. So it's more empowering for us to use words for ourselves, like Afrika, because then we're speaking of the flesh, of the hidden sun, the illuminated one that has soul essence. So we're staying in harmony with the Most High soul source by all the names that we identify. And this is shared through the work of Baba Haru Akra Seita, who is the keeper of the Shrine of Ptah, and also the designer of wonderful arts at the Studio of Ptah. This woman should also be familiar. And we're speaking of Queen Mother Funmilayo Ransom Kuti. And we were very fortunate to have one of our colleagues share some wonderful information, excellent detail, in terms of not just whose son she gave, who her son was, where her sons are, were and are, but also, more specifically, the power, the Pan-Africanist engagement of this woman, and how engaging her life examples have been in Nigeria, and how it affected the rest of the world. We speak of ancestral birthrights and an ancient indigenosity to Africa. We speak of global diasporic context, and many times when we speak of these things, then the term Pan-Africanism, have we really taken some time to define what Pan-Africanism is? If we were to go through this room right now and give everyone a piece of paper, what would be their definitions of Pan-Africanism? I guarantee you we have several. And it's very important that we reflect and look into that, because it's worthy of education. Another face that we should remember when we speak of Pan-Africanism, Inaugural Pan-African. We speak of him in the context of Pan-Africanism was very different in his time, because it was armed struggle. So it wasn't all of this discourse. We didn't have the luxury of not having security anywhere. It was a very different layer in that part of the 20th century. So you see that I use the terms diaspora and indigenous African interchangeably with what is now becoming more in trend, the global African term, or just Africans, or African world citizens, or whatever the root is, we're still African people and we're indigenous. We're indigenous to the planet. We're the elders of humanity. And it's very important that we keep that in the forefront of our discourse. Talking about definitions, Dr. John Henry Clark not only spoke of power and how we are to establish that power in the African World Union, but he spoke of a particular definition of Pan-Africanism that was very focused on as any effort on the part of African people to reclaim any portion of Africa that has been taken away, mutilated, misunderstood, or misinterpreted by a non-African to the detriment of Africa. And we could go on that just on and on. We also have definitions like the total liberation and unification of Africa under a social governance system that is based on the benefits of the society. Yeah? For some, it's African socialism. For others, it's scientific socialism. For others, it may be communism, etc. Because for some, it would be finding something positive in the capitalist imperialist model. So we can move towards this next Pan-Africanist, Amy Ashton Garvey. Again, we've had the opportunity to hear information about her life, her contributions, and continuation in the work within the UNIA, ACL, and beyond throughout the earth. And we're speaking of it in the context of, sometimes we keep saying slave, slave. No woman gives birth to a slave. So new etymology shifts. Enslaved. Speak of the action. Don't call the person, the being, the human, a slave. It'd be more empowering. It's something that is really part of this research that I'm engaged in. So we talk about genocidal enslavement, yes, and we speak of African triangular hydrocaust. That's why we have brothers and sisters that don't like water. They don't like to swim. There's some ancestral trauma issues that have also been shared by one of our other colleagues. And this great man here, Reverend Dr. Edward Moore Blyden, again, born in St. Thomas, parents Igbo from Nigeria. They were free. Very gifted, very, very, very talented. So talented that Rutgers College, their seminary, was going to receive him until they saw him and did not permit him entry. But that was just the gateway for him to then go and take his word, his knowledge, his skill, talent, and expertise home. And although he did return to the Virgin Islands for a short time, some of his words in terms of not just boasting about the services that we do, but to actually go and implement and take action, were really highlighted in his work. And I like this particular portion because it speaks of events are moving on for its regeneration, and the grand march of progress will go on whether you join it or not. So there's some persons that are going to be into the Pan-Africanist movement. There's some people that are going to be able to come into the Black nationalist movement, and there's some that won't. And we do not need to allow those energies that do not engage to deter the work that is ancestral and requires indigenous engagement. Amy Jack's party. Diaspora and indigenous African contributors to Pan-Africanism and global African nation building are very, very many. So I have a long list, and I'm asking everyone in here to begin to add to this list so that we begin to give them names and we give them faces. If we're saying we're going to teach this and we're going to institutionalize it and we're going to develop curriculum for it, then we need to be able to give names and faces and biographical information and make sure it is as accurate as possible. Because we do have some calendars that give some incorrect information. So there's a number of names, some that I've listed here,